All right, well, events like this are a great visual reminder of the growing and thriving community we have here in Toronto. I've spent much of the morning interacting with people from all walks of life, academic and professional backgrounds. These rooms are getting richer by the day, so thank you for being here and for attending this conversation we have today. When I connected with David earlier on in the year, he shared that a topic folks in the room would like to learn more about is that of determining and prioritizing commercial machine learning use cases. Our goal today is to really lean into that and cover as much ground as possible because it is a gap in the conversation around AI, and it's also what's going to help us move beyond research into commercializing and actually implementing solutions in market. So joining me today in tackling this subject is an esteemed panel of leaders with extensive hands-on experience in this topic. We have Rupinder, Chief Data Officer and SVP of Data and AI at Hudson Bay Company, Tomi, the Chief AI Officer at TD and co-founder of Layer 6, as well as the co-founder of the Vector Institute, which is a leading independent research institute dedicated to advancing the field of machine learning. Simona, Senior Director and AI Lead at the National Bank of Canada's Wealth Division, and Ofer, Chief AI Officer at Deloitte's AI practice, Omnia AI. Our chat today is going to be roughly 45 minutes, and I've allocated around 15 minutes for a question and answer with the audience, because we really want to hear from all of you as well. So before we dive into a really deep discussion on specific use cases, I wanted to start with getting all of your perspectives on a huge gap I've seen personally in the field of applied AI, which is mapping the science, research, and technology to the business problems. The task often sits with individuals who are pretty separated from the technology. And so I wanted to know if you think we, as business practitioners and professionals, really understand what AI is and how it may be relevant to the operations of any given team.
What we've done in our organization is we've identified a specific role of a person who does the bridge between the business unit and the scientists. And ideally that person has to have a business understanding, but has to also have a solid understanding of the AI toolbox. So I'm one of those person, and I personally have a better understanding of the AI toolbox than the business, and that's sometimes the problem. But yeah, the goal is really to find the right balance between the two and have a person dedicated to that.
What we've seen is business rarely understand the technology enough to really be that bridge. And it's partly our own fault. Like we look at the media and we talk about killer robots and AI that learns automatically and does 101 different things. And, at the end of the day, the technology it's still very much narrow, solving one problem at a time. Business doesn't really understand that. So in our work, we don't have a dedicated person, but we encourage our data scientists to sit very close to the business and understand the business that they're solving so that they can be that bridge.
I think we've taken a slightly different approach at HBC because I've seen it done a number of different ways. And I think we're really trying to kind of do something slightly different. So the wonderful woman who leads our AI practice now is actually from the business. So she has 15 years of retail merchandising experience. She has an aptitude and a passion to learn the technology. So she's actually leading our AI group now just to make sure that everything that we're working on is actually rooted in what is the business problem that we're actually trying to solve.
So I guess my question would be, how do you distribute and simplify that process of really sharing the knowledge within the organization? Do you rely on external partners, the specific team within the organization? What have you seen from your experience within an enterprise landscape or a business really work?
Yeah, let me pick that up on my experience at TD Bank. So I came to TD Bank by way of an acquisition. I'm a founder of an AI company here in Toronto, Layer 6, that was acquired by TD Bank in January of last year. And as part of that acquisition, the bank stood up a parallel organization to us that handled the machine of a large enterprise. And so we, hypothetically, we were as a lab, we were there to build the machine learned models, but the bank didn't want to smother us by having to spend all of our time talking to the business. So it's very helpful to have an enterprise machine learning counterpart to the machine learning lab that was able to handle those conversations and evangelize the capability that we had. Of course, for a large enterprise, there's a lot more than just identifying a use case. You have to go through, you have to ensure you can have access to the data, you have to go through a bunch of governance processes, and then to deliver the data to an environment that machine learning scientists can work on. And just to get the machinery to work around that is a full-time job for a lot of people. So it's helpful to have kind of a separation of the lab from kind of the more tactical process.
Helpful.
On our side, I think we took kind of the opposite approach. We divided the AI team in smaller groups and planted them deeply within the organization's lines of business. So, and my role would be then to attach whatever they were going to do to the very clear business priorities as defined by the business lines. So kind of the opposite approach. I think there are pros and cons to both approaches. Some have more agility, others have more freedom to evolve. So yeah.
I think the important part is kind of demystifying it for folks, though. So I think a lot of our time at the beginning was even spent just on road shows on, you know, how do you frame your business problem as a prediction problem? Just being able to kind of get people to think and be at least thinking about business problems as a potential machine learning use case, and making it less kind of like an ivory tower team that sits off, does this magical stuff, and just making it a little bit more accessible and understandable for our business partners as well.
If I can follow up on the organizational design, it's a big question for a big enterprise, and whether you have a central center of excellence for AI or whether the business lines manage their own AI capability. Pros and cons to both of them. I think from our perspective, having been acquired and being new to the banking world in general, it really helped us kind of grow our own identity and our own culture, but it has had limitations to it. So in the beginning, I don't think the bank really knew the capability of that AI and machine learning could provide, and the early set of use cases delivered to us were ones where we were asked to do things that they were already doing, but better. Right? And typically machine learning can exceed what a linear regression model can. But that wasn't necessarily strategic, right? To like that's just more efficient, better models, but it's not game changing. So the way to really get to the game changing work is to work for the machine learning scientists to work directly inside the business and really understand the business. So even for us, our operating model is changing from being a somewhat independent lab to now being choosing fewer projects or fewer businesses that we go really deep in and embedding ourselves there.
Yeah, it's helpful. And I do want to shift gears a little to discussing use cases. So we use the word use case really widely and loosely. My personal opinion is that a lot of stakeholders within companies have a definition of their own with respect to what they think it is. It could be an instance, a process, a specific task. What's your take or definition on what a use case is? That's my first part of the question. And the second part is, what are some of the unique business opportunities or use cases you're seeing for machine learning across verticals? I know we were quite heavy on financial sector here, but I'm curious to hear your thoughts across verticals there.
So we work with our clients a lot to define what a use case is typically. And we try to keep it fairly narrow. So a use case is a problem that sort of you solve in a point in time. And you can then bundle those use cases up into larger and larger projects that you can deliver larger and larger value and get more and more innovative. But you have to start sort of with the most poignant problem that you're going to solve. In terms of what defines a use case, I mean, it varies in the banking industry. They have their sets of problems around credit risk or customer acquisition or churn. But we've done a lot of stuff, for example, in industry around maintenance, being able to identify or predict when equipment will fail, in supply chain, optimizing routing and scheduling. So it varies a lot. And when we talk about machine learning and AI, there's a sense of it's a general purpose technology, and you're really seeing it adapted across industries for a lot of different purposes. Much like Rupinder said, like framing a business problem as a prediction instead of an algorithm helps kind of shift that mindset to what can we do with this technology now.
So in my mind, a suitable machine learning use case is really a production system that it's not a one and done kind of a thing. You're building a software system that can make inferences on an ongoing basis and get better over time. And you know, at TD Bank, when we joined, there were 16 of us, and there was 1,800 data scientists, right? So those 1,800 data scientists were building things like credit scoring models. They were building things like propensity models that was being used by marketing on their marketing campaigns. But something like that, even if it was done with a machine learning system, it was really done, done for the production of a customer list, and then customer list was handed over to marketing, and then away they would go. Like when you try to bring a layer 6 or a machine learning system into play, and those are pretty heavy systems to productize, and it carries a lot of risk. It takes a long time. So you really want to make sure that you bring the jet engine to the types of use cases that need it. And we look for opportunities where we build kind of a transformative system that can, say, crank out a scoring model every day that's tapped into all the data flowing through the enterprise, and it can be operated and managed with robustness and in a way that it improves over time. So those are the ones where like machine learning can really shine. And we've done now a whole bunch of them across the enterprise. TD is a full service bank, which has lots of different banking functions. And each one of our projects has succeeded. Where there's been a baseline of some old model that we've replaced, we've improved in the predictive accuracy by 30% or higher, sometimes almost doubled the old models. And I'm just saying that to make a statement to Toronto Machine Learning Summit community that machine learning really works and really is much better than statistical analytics.
I think it also depends on kind of where you are in your maturity kind of roadmap, right? So like that definition can feel quite daunting to an organization that's just starting out. So even to be able to take that and then dissect it down into kind of smaller pieces and kind of deliver on a smaller piece, measure it, see that there's value in it, build on another piece, improve it over time. I think it also depends on kind of where you are in your maturity curve in terms of how you define use cases.
One additional point maybe when the maturity level is different within a same organization between the different groups, right? So it's really important to identify on a matrix of feasibility versus value, your low-hanging fruit items and your game changers, and to, depending on the maturity, when you need to turn an organization around to realize the value of data, you go for the low-hanging fruits and then you have a quick win. And then if you're mature, you go for the game changers and you build the foundations to set the operationalization with the feedback loop and so on.
You have to be a little careful with the feedback loop though, because things have gone out of control in many cases. You have to put the proper governance and control and monitoring around that.
True.
And it's interesting, like some of the statistics you're mentioning, but we've seen, first of all, when we talk about machine learning, I mean, even logistic regression is machine learning, but we see the shift in the conversation really when where sort of the modern techniques take effect is on unstructured data or new data sources and combining lots of different data sources. But often we see the baseline is, because we said like 1,800 data scientists typically been working on a lot of these problems for a long time. We tend to see pretty good baselines in our work with the banks and elsewhere. Like we don't necessarily see those kind of big jumps. And a good use case and a good new sort of approach for machine learning tends to be where you can train a human to do this task in about 10 minutes, but it's just not feasible to do it because of the amount of data or because of the amount of work. That's where kind of that tends to be a good starting point, we find.
So I want to switch over to discussing the strategic imperative of a use case. So how do we begin to determine whether a use case is strategic and have or gain that clarity on the business benefits or the potential gain that comes out of it? Because I anticipate that that's, or assume rather, that that's a really big part of what gets prioritized and deprioritized. So I'd love if we could share some comments on that.
Well, the business strategies and the strategic user experiences or would-be client experiences would be already identified by the business unit. So the first mind to tap in is to look at those already defined strategies. Like, for example, at the National Bank, it's client-centric, having a positive impact on your client, advice. So you identify that, you make that your playground, and you try to identify rockets that could just speed up the whole value chain right there. That's one way of looking at it. Then the other ones are game changers. So these are harder to justify. You need to change things around. There's change management there. You have to take into account all the infrastructural changes that are needed to make them happen and to quantify your ROI.
And do we need to ensure that there's a standardized framework or I guess like metric of evaluating the effectiveness of these use cases across the organization? Or is that typically best left siloed to that function of the business?
I think as long as you have a mechanism to see it flow down to your bottom line, right? And that could be in combination with the team that is delivering that use case with finance. I think that's the piece that people tend to overlook. That how will this value actually show up in your P&L, right? But I think it's, again, that can be very daunting to think about that right out of the gate, right? So it's really trying to understand, okay, what quick wins can I deliver? What has, a path to productionalization so it doesn't kind of get left in a lab? What can I carve off that is actually manageable and I feel like I can deliver it, and what is something that I can actually measure, right? And then build on it. Like any machine learning model, it's not going to be perfect your first iteration through, right? You always evolve it. I think that's how you got to view these machine learning use cases as well.
Yeah. So tactics versus strategy for large enterprise. I think every company now, a large enterprise realizes that they're a data platform and they need to extract value out of that data. So machine learning becomes very important. The first strategic consideration is, do you buy, build in-house or partner? Right, so that's there's a limited amount of talent out there, and just getting started, going from 0 to 1 is a difficult one, and the company needs to make. So whatever their chosen path is, when you do have machine learning, access to machine learning chops, you still need to decide which projects you go after. And certainly there will be a lot of, usually the decision is based on ROI, feasibility. But those can turn out to be very tactical things. You look at a big spreadsheet where you sort by ROI, and then you're just forever going through that list. There's a lot of very strategic opportunities you may be foregoing by not looking at the longer term picture. And there may not be an ROI, so short-term ROI associated with it. Fundamentally, machine learning will help us understand our data better. It'll help us understand our customers better, which then can help us serve those customers. And if you're serving your customer, if at the end of the day, if you're able to serve your customers better, that's a winning strategy, even if there isn't a dollar figure, short-term dollar figure attached to it. So the questions there are like, what are some of the few strategic throws that you're going to make, that you're going to invest in on the long term, at the expense of some of these shorter-term tactical revenue wins?
So you touched a bit on data availability. What impact does that have on the level of prioritization? Is there like a threshold or a limit of available data at which point you're like, this is a feasible use case? How do you navigate that?
Absolutely, data is key. Without data, you can't do anything. So, in fact, a lot of our work is we come in talking about data science, end up staying there for a year, just helping them get the data into shape in order to be able to do the data science. Various industries are obviously different levels of maturity. The banking is ahead of the game. Other industries are lagging behind.
Can you comment on also some of the steps, I guess, an enterprise can take to prepare themselves for machine learning applications? Because a lot of the data is unstructured in different places. So what have you seen in terms of things they can do to stay ahead of the curve there?
Stay ahead or catch up?
Yeah.
It's more catch up, to be honest. The most common strategy we see is setting up a data lake where you can have all your data in one place as the first step. But it's a shift in the mindset in terms of the IT org and how people address it. We've had cases where clients tell us that they have the data and it's sitting on people's laptops in Excel files.
Wow.
So just being able to organize the data, creating the pipelines to make sure that everything is in one place and can be used for the more sophisticated systems, that's kind of the key. And it varies. It can be anything from relational database to data lakes to some combination.
A key aspect is to not neglect the data engineering efforts required and to staff accordingly. I mean, data science and the AI science and machine learning are cool, but you need to prepare data ahead of time, and that can't be neglected. And the second aspect that I always insist upon is the most valuable data sometimes tend to be the data that we don't have. I design applications that are to be used by our clients or by our advisors with one goal in mind, as a data harvesting app, such that each click can be converted back into actionable clean data that I can use to label my training samples. So we need to create that mind shift across the organization, that data harvesting is important and that you need to think ahead of the game.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah.
Sometimes that data just doesn't exist.
Yeah.
And for a lot of applications that the business may want, things like personalized pricing or a strategy that they may take, if you historically haven't had variability in actions that you've taken, then the training data that you have just isn't helpful in personalizing the experience.
Right. Yeah.
So a lot of this is also a question of design with the business, to say, okay, this is the end state where we want to get to. In order for us to be able to train a model to do that, we need the following sets of data. Your business needs to start gathering that data, and maybe you need to be doing that for a year. We'll see you in 2021. So that's just also like making sure that the enterprise understands what's required to be fed into a training model, and then they can change practices accordingly. But some of these things, when data doesn't exist, it's a matter of starting to plan for the future.
So I've made a poster now, you know, that guy when it's not what you can do for your country, what your country can do for you, or whatever the other opposite side. It's not what data can do for you, it's what you can do for data. And I've posted it around all the labs and everybody. Yeah.
I think that ties back well with the build versus buy conversation as well, because I think sometimes the mistake that a lot of organizations make is that if they decide to buy it, that it's like some standalone black box, right? So I think even if you choose to buy, that data has to flow back into kind of your ML ecosystem, right? Because it needs to feed back into the things that you choose to build. And you also want to try to build up that connection that you're learning from that model that you bought. That learning on what a customer selected, but also what a customer didn't select, is potentially feeding back into your other ML models that you also may have bought somewhere else, right?
Right.
So thinking about ML as an ecosystem, just the same way you would think of data as an ecosystem.
From a technology and infrastructure standpoint, given that there are a lot of changes that one must keep in mind when assessing different use cases, can you give us some prompts on things that we should be thinking about in terms of I guess requirements a company must assess? Like how it would impact their existing systems or integrate with some of their back-end systems? Because there is a huge change management piece here. People management is one thing, but change management from a system standpoint. So what have you seen in your experience in terms of the complexity that lies there?
Yeah, let me address just the act of getting started. So dev tools for machine learning scientists. So an enterprise will have a lot of data, customer data. That customer data is laden with PII, personally identifiable info. There's a lot of governance around that. Data scientists are are building very modern machine learning stacks using open source software that they want to deploy at the data. And they want full access to those systems. So the very first question is that an enterprise needs to think about is, how do I protect this highly sensitive data? And when the data scientists want unfeathered access to it. And you throw into that the fact that enterprises may be at various degrees of maturity in their build out of their data lakes and their internal compute infrastructure. And a lot of them are also moving to that cloud. Right, so lots of info security considerations around all of this. So I think there's a massive step in just like making a machine learning scientist productive and being able to deploy their preferred choice of tooling onto this data set, and also the need for that data set to be abstracted or tokenized in a way where that PII isn't readily available to the data scientists themselves. So I think that's like the very first step a large company needs to think about is how do you build an environment that's suitable for building models? And then there's the second step around how you actually productize it, but I'll let somebody else here answer that question.
I think that's the biggest challenge. Like the modeling piece isn't maybe the wrong thing to say for this crowd. The modeling piece might not be the hardest part. It's how do you then integrate that into some hardcore legacy systems that are in a lot of cases mainframe, right? So I know, in my previous life at Bell, the challenge was more around how do we now integrate and kind of unlock our legacy systems to be able to leverage the models. And that's where we looked for a lot of external help to say, not necessarily on building the models, but then how do we get it to integrate into the IVR and some of these traditional models, traditional systems that we have.
And I think in that way, machine learning has had a lot of positive impact already, just forcing enterprises to think about switching over to the cloud, switching over to open source tools, moving into more open environments, and still without sacrificing the security and the privacy and everything. So often, like, that is one of the biggest immediate impact out of just starting to think about machine learning and AI.
Simona, we spoke a bit about this earlier on in the day. Can you comment on some of the legal, ethical, and social acceptability and regulatory aspects of the use cases we're exploring?
Absolutely. So in banking and in society in general, the use of PI data is strictly regulated, right? So there are laws around the protection of PI data, laws around not discriminating based on gender, sexual, religious orientation, ethnicity, and so on. So there needs to be a very strong governance around how we build our machine models, and not only how we build them, what data we use, do we have the consent to use them, and how, what action are we going to take with them? So that's extremely important. We've set up governance and processes around that at the bank, for example. But this touches upon a subject that I'm very passionate about, and which is the social impact of the models, because beyond the legality of it, there is how the user impact. Are the clients actually going to feel comfortable using some kind of machine learning system? And an example would be, I don't know, if you look at you get a notification on your cell phone that there's a flash flood, and so that means that in your area you need to evacuate. That means some system out there knows your location precisely, and then you go out of a restaurant and you get a notification, you're being asked whether you enjoy that restaurant, and you say, okay, that's Big Brother. It's the same data, but the perception is different, right? So if you give me 1 extra minute, I'll expand upon that even further. This sensitivity around AI is partly due to our fear and this hype around AI that was created by big robots, future sci-fi movies and whatever, but it's not new. So there was this big article in The Atlantic 2008 by Nicholas Carr, Is Google Making Us Stupid? I feel the same when I use Google Drive sometimes. I have no idea what I've done. And there was this other researcher, Konrad Gessner, who said that this information overload and these new tools sometimes debilitate our own capacities. But he wrote that in 1565, and he was referring to printing. So, and you know, our fear of introducing new technologies in school. My kids had to use laptops at school, and I was worried that this is like too much intrusion of technology and the learning. And Socrates was worried about the same thing, and he was worried about writing. So what I'm saying is that there are absolutely valid fears and concerns that we need to regulate upon, and there are others that are subjective and we will overcome with time as technology will become more familiar.
And it's cultural. Like HBC, we operate in the US because we run Saks and Saks off Fifth in Canada. And the sensitivity around kind of Canadians and their data is very different than Americans and their data. Americans feel like, yeah, of course you're using my data. Like, why wouldn't you be, right? Where, there's a lot more sensitivity in Canada. So, we do have to be thoughtful about, policies and explainability and all of that kind of addresses those two levels, because you also don't want to be less competitive in your US space because you're trying to apply like a Canadian standard to the US audience as well. There's a lot to think through.
At TD over the summer, we conducted a consumer survey on their attitudes towards AI in the financial service sector. So we polled 1,500 Canadians, and also we had a panel discussion with industry experts and from academia, et cetera. And Canadians told us three things on their views of technology and AI generally. They said they expect banks to innovate. I think the standard, their expectation is being set by big tech companies, and how big tech companies are innovating and providing valuable services to them that they're engaged with on an ongoing basis. People are generally comfortable with AI. They get their music recommendations and movie recommendations with AI, and they probably got to work that morning because of AI. So they're comfortable with AI. Everybody knows they're getting value from it. But they certainly had reservations when it came to AI in a banking setting.
Right.
Because it's opaque to people. They don't know how the bank is using it, nor do they know what their own value is. What will I get out of it? There are fears around, whether they'll still have access to credit, or whether their insurance premiums will go up because of something that is in some data element that's being interpreted by machines. So there's certainly a level of concern that was expressed, but yet hope that AI will provide something beneficial.
I'm curious. Sorry, go ahead.
But I think it's up to banks in our case to deliver tangible value to the consumer that they can recognize. So just in the simple case of helping an individual manage their financial lives, their cash flow, or even get advice, AI can deliver that to 100% of the population, where right now financial advice and financial planning is really only available to the 1%ers, right? AI can deliver that scalably to everybody. So that's the kind of things that I think it's up to certainly our sector, it's up to us to deliver that value with AI to consumers directly.
Do you think we're putting enough focus and efforts behind managing that change management component of these use cases? Because I think when we look at AI, we're always looking at it from the gaze of customer use cases. But a lot of employee experiences in the next 2 to 5 years are going to change significantly. And that can be perceived because of the perception of AI as being a threat to their day-to-day jobs. So how do you promote that positive culture of AI within the business for employees? As well as what level of prioritization does that have on the use case? If it's a more complex sort of use case and actually does have the potential to automate a significant portion of someone's job in terms of tasks, do you deprioritize that because you haven't figured out the change management piece? How do you navigate that?
I don't think you deprioritize it. I think it's like, yes, AI use cases bring a different nuance, but it's like I think you almost need to approach it like anything that you would roll out in terms of a new training program where you're doing some kind of branding or culture change. I think it has to be just as well thought through, if not more so. So I think depending on the impact, you really want to make sure that you kind of start up that stream of work with either your HR partners or kind of like your company culture partners to make sure that that's happening alongside, right? And I think the number of, as many people that are going to be impacted that you can bring into the process to kind of help design what it looks like, what it feels like, you know, how they interact with it, the better, because they essentially then also become your champions as this rolls out.
I think if anything, automation use cases tend to be some of the first ones that companies tackle, and it has an immediate impact on the workforce for sure. We have to think about it not just at the enterprise level, but really at the national level, and
Absolutely.
we need to create infrastructure on this, social welfare and retraining.
It's not just a business problem.
It's not just a business problem at all, and we're missing some key regulations, I think, still on in terms of the privacy and what you can and can't do with the data in Canada. Right now, we're very happy to follow GDPR, for example, but we don't really have clear guidelines. So, whereas the US is happy to, if there's no regulation, do whatever you want. In Canada, it's almost the other way around. If there's no regulation, be careful what you do, or else. And we need those kind of guidance so that enterprises can innovate, so that they can push the envelope without having to fear what the repercussion is.
So
I also wanted just and one other additional angle is that sometimes those tools that you build to automate certain tasks, you also accompany them with tools to augment the value of the human intervention. So sometimes it's about freeing up people from certain mundane tasks that they're doing and freeing them up to doing much more impactful work. So it's not necessarily all bad. That was just one additional point.
And also, I wanted to add that TD Bank didn't buy Layer 6 to strip out jobs, to automate jobs. They bought us to better service their customers. And if you look at the opportunities, if you can deploy AI selectively only a few places, if there are opportunities to strip out 100 jobs there and 200 jobs there, versus a much bigger opportunity to service the whole population and compete more effectively in the US, you'll always go for you'll always prioritize opportunities to build capability and better service the customer and go for deepening your relationships with your customers. And that's certainly been our experience at TD Bank. I see AI being a great way of augmenting human capability. So for a retail banking customer that now banks transacts mostly on their phone, ATM, on the website, over the phone, or may talk to a branch manager. This omni-channel experience makes it very hard for a frontline person to even piece together the history, the financial health of that individual and what they may want. And that's where AI can really help the front line understand the customer better and the customer needs better. And imagine just a very specific scenario. If you're in the front line, tasked on a collections assignment, somebody's in arrears, and you place a call to check up on that individual. Well, usually the process is one where you have a bunch of people on a dialer. And when a connection is made, you're connected into a call center operator. That all happens in real time. The call center operator is just connected to John Smith, and then they have to start piecing together the history, and they're opening up all of these different dialogues and accessing different tables to understand what is going on with this customer. That's where AI can provide tremendous insight to help have a much more meaningful and constructive conversation.
We have a stream actually that is specifically to kind of employee enablement. So that includes associates in the stores, and so we're in retail, so kind of some of our use cases are a little bit lighter, right? So being able to recommend what would look good on a customer based on their past purchasing, what colors, and complete the look kind of things, right? So we do have a stream specifically for how do we enable our associates, whether they're in the call center, in the stores, or even via chat. How do we enable them to just have a better interaction with that customer?
Right. So one more question, and then if we have a couple of minutes, open it up to the floor. Rupinder, you discussed earlier today, you were sharing insights on the AI champion. And I'd love if you could share some of your insights on who that person is, where they sit within the organization. Is that something that can be trained and developed over time, or is that someone who just, his natural default response to AI is to love it? And how does that individual differ from, say, an executive sponsor? I think the concept of AI champion is still relatively new, so I'd love if you could share your comments on that.
Yeah, so I think the way that we've approached it both at Bell and now at HBC is that we need to make it accessible, that everyone feels that there's a part to play in this, right? That we're not just looking for hardcore data scientists, we're also looking for BAs, PMs, like everyone that has a better understanding of what AI can do, and it's to kind of round out the team on not just creating the models, but also delivering kind of the change management piece that comes along with it. So, we've found our champions both, in the technical space, but also our champions within the business as well, right? And I think, again, as long as, people want to just feel like if there's something exciting happening, they want to feel a part of it, right? And that's the best way to build the momentum around it and to kind of eliminate some of the barriers and, trying to kind of, push water uphill and trying to get the buy-in. So we've really tried to find our champions in a number of different roles. Like we have a champion now in our PMO, right? And that PMO champion is the one that's helping us kind of redefine processes. Like we sent a bunch of folks from our PMO to a machine, design thinking for machine learning course, so they could start thinking about, okay, how do we restructure our projects, right? And restructure how we think about project delivery. So really it's trying to find those champions wherever, because I think you don't want to just, put them in a box that our champions are only going to be like our data scientists or our exec sponsor. I think it's, as broad as you can make it.
Awesome. Any other thoughts on AI champion before we wrap up?
We've seen that you really need executive buy-in, especially in the more traditional companies. There can be, sometimes we can get ROI fairly quickly, but in other cases it takes a significant investment, especially when going back to the data issues that we talked about earlier. So having that executive sponsor champion that really drives it forward and kind of provide that support is key. Otherwise, we call it pushing water uphill, but it just constantly trying to convince the business that this is a good and this is the future can be very challenging.
I think that's where pilots are also really helpful, because you're able to take some actionable insight from that and validate a use case, for instance, and then go back to the business units and say, this is what we should invest in, or make a recommendation. All right, so we need to wrap up right now, but I think we covered a lot of ground. Obviously, we could go into great depth on each one, but things like strategic imperatives, governance, technology, infrastructure changes, the expertise, an AI champion are all different aspects that have a weightage on what gets prioritized or can get prioritized as far as an ML use case is concerned. I'm going to open up the floor. We have a couple of minutes. Okay, don't know how we're going to do this. Is there a microphone, or? I think there's a microphone set up here. So if anyone has any questions, we're here to answer, and you've got all the right minds sitting next to me to do that.
Okay, I have a question about specifically opportunities which machine learning provides for external company, which has some expertise maybe you can't develop domestically. Because if you take history of any major system integration like CRM, ERP, document management systems, normally banks or large organizations use external expertise rather than grow internal 100% expertise in every product they use. So how do you see external consulting, external integration role in current machine learning situation? So do you see products to integrate? Do you see specific skills consulting company should bring to you to be successful with you in this journey?
So just to reiterate the question for the group, so the question was around how do you, what's your perspective on bringing in external capabilities or products, even vendors, when you're working towards your ML use cases? So internal versus external.
Can I jump in on that one?
Yeah.
We welcome external help. I think we have a very specific guideline, though, that when we are bringing in an external company to come in and help us, that they are working side by side with our team and building together, because really it's to serve as a bit of a catalyst to also build the skills in-house. So if you're working side by side and our teams are learning from those teams, that's been our approach and what we look for.
Maybe from the other side of the consulting piece, like we definitely also look for that as well. But we look for where there are gaps that we can fill as opposed to augment. So we try to actually train ourselves out of the job. So when we join a company, we'll hand-in-hand delivery. We call it crawl, walk, run, where we set them up to deliver on their own. But it doesn't work. It doesn't tend to work too well if we're covering the same ground in terms of capabilities. It works well when we're really filling in gaps in the capabilities.
And with,
so
vendors,
do you have specific skills or gaps in mind? Because it's sort of generic. Yes, you have some gaps, but could you specify it a little bit?
It varies. Some companies already have robust development experience and they need the data science augmentation. Some companies, they have data scientists and analysts, but they have no productionization experience. Some companies need help with the change management, so it really varies across the board.
Sometimes I'd say it's also providing a team, right, with a lot of cross-disciplinary roles, like a product strategist, a developer, a designer. I think, it probably largely depends on the team. Yeah.
And you're not just buying the services of a team for the people. A lot of vendors also bring data and expertise into the fold. So if you're looking at an anti-money laundering use case or need, then a third-party vendor that services many banks, for example, will just have more data than one bank alone, and in particular they have a point of view on the flow of funds between banks. TD has a good relationship with a company called Casisto that's built our chatbot in our TD app, and again there they've trained that over years. They bring special expertise. They've trained that with other banks that are very like bank-related Q&A and conversations that customers may have. So they have a very specific specialty that they are able to leverage the development cost of that across their many customers, and it would be prohibitively expensive for us to do that ourselves. But yeah, we work with them closely because it's not just they provide an interface, they provide one component of it. But then the customer insights and the actual back-end calls are made into the enterprise, and that's where we look to augment that. So it's a close partnership.
And I would reiterate the same message, and I would add also the fact that we sometimes, and quite often actually deal with vendors, startups who are offering a new product, just like you mentioned, and we do so within the AI team only if we can actually leverage their product internally. If it helps us go further, then it means we have a good business case. And for example, we've launched a startup innovation contest where we offer $100,000 to the winning team who is going to use the APIs of one of the companies that we've invested in, Flinks. And it's a wealth management innovation contest, no strings attached. And we are looking to then leverage that kind of partnership afterwards.
Thank you.
All right.
Hi, my name is Amit, and I lead a machine learning team in downtown Toronto. This is not a question, but this is sharing my experience. I think whatever you have discussed is really good, and it vindicates what we are doing. I mean, we're building products with AI, and as Rupinder said, AI is not the hardest part, and I completely agree to it. And then we are building data lakes on it. For our data, we are having, like as Tomi said, we have the data has PII, right? So we are using that as well to clean it up. And also there is a lot of things involved in building a product. So it's very happy to hear from all of you that whatever your experience is also what we are doing in practice and building products out of it. So just wanted to share my experience.
Oh, awesome.
And I'm also speaking tomorrow on a similar topic, which is re-architecting legacy machine learning systems. So a lot of the things which we, start as a POC and then bring into production, and then how things change.
Awesome.
So that's really thankful to you for sharing your experience.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Did you have a question? Yeah, go for it.
Hi, this is Upal from Sun Life. Just a question on productization. Tomi, you mentioned like it could take a long time. some of the companies here, like we're starting on the journey to productize models. What's the reasonable expectation from the business? Is it weeks, months? What have you guys seen, is a good expectation for us to have?
So your question's on timelines associated with use cases?
Yeah,
so what's
for machine learning models.
Yeah, I guess if you could give us a quick commentary on the timeline associated with maybe pilots versus a full deployment, what can we expect from the whole process? I would say it keeps going, but
yeah, we've launched pilots anywhere between like 6 weeks to 3 months, and then scaling out to full production within a year. And production meaning, kind of full integration into, legacy systems, running inference on demand, things like that.
Yeah, there's huge variability, both in terms of the pilots and deployment. It depends on how mature you are in the infrastructure. You can sometimes go from model to production in a matter of weeks. In other cases, in some more complicated use cases or stuff that affects the enterprise more wholly, it can be a year or longer. It varies greatly.
It's worthwhile to, like I said, break it into chunks because a year, 2 years, 3 years is a long time to show ROI. So if you can show kind of, incremental value as you go along and kind of chunk out part of that delivery.
I was going to say, I'd add the technology itself is another thing. So we work a lot, my domain is fully focused on voice, and when you look at Google Actions or Alexa skills, because of how, democratized the technology itself is, so much of it can be done on these platforms without even knowing how to code. The timeline is significantly smaller than, say, building a recommendation engine for an in-store associate. So yeah, it's just an additional thought there. So you were waiting for a step.
Great presentations, thank you very much. I come from healthcare industry. So all the things you mentioned in the banking, we are starting to feel the pain now, especially PII. Do you have any standard methodology to hide the PII from the training data or forecasting or whatever? So every bank will do different ways to hide the PII from the developers. Is there a standard methodology amongst the banks or financial institutions to do so? Second part is, once you have done that, are you willing to put these de-anonymized data in open domain? So I come from healthcare industry, so we put lots of data in public domain so that data scientists or very sharp people can go and do something about it and come back and report it, right? Do you do that kind of things?
So standardized process for making sure you're not compromising on private personal information, and your developers are not working with or having access to rather data they shouldn't be.
It's front and center in any banking institution, the investment that we do and the compromises we need to make sometimes to agility in development, to make sure that the environments we develop in are secure and the data is anonymized and not PII are huge. Sometimes we really take a hit on development of machine learning capabilities because we consciously decide to keep the data secure.
Yeah, I would second that. And not only are banks regulated, so all the stuff around PII is heavily regulated by the feds, but I would say also that the banking business model is one of trust. Right?
Yes.
So the trust of a customer is paramount to a bank, and they will protect that. And they will always fall to data privacy rules that favor the customer and try to keep everything private. And in many cases for us, the data arrives to us masked. A lot of it is masked, and we have to actually make a case for why some stuff should be unmasked. And every one of those decisions goes through a governance process where people that are experts in this area will actually make a judgment on whether that's appropriate or not. So that's certainly a very long process for us, even start engaging with the data governance around it, and it's absolutely appropriate. I think your question was around tooling. Is there tooling to standardize these things? I think there's a gap in tooling. There is columns certainly will be marked as this is the social insurance number and everything comes in mass, but some of these data elements aren't that well documented, and the metadata is lacking. So a lot of cases, the default answer is just mask everything and then piecemeal open it up. So tooling definitely could be improved there. Yeah. In a healthcare environment, it's even more difficult because these medical images that come through often will have the patient's name scribbled there somewhere, right? And so you have to identify that and mask it out. With regard to open sourcing these data sets, banks hold this data very tight to them. Obviously, they're concerned about any potential leaks that may come out of it. Even in the case of Netflix, when they had the Netflix Prize, people were able to piece together a few individuals in this anonymized data set by their viewing habits. And a bank would never want that from a reputational risk perspective. Ontario healthcare system is no different. We've been collecting and digitizing healthcare records since 1991. So we have huge amounts of data, but it's locked up in this Fort Knox environment and is never released to anybody, even though scientists could make great use out of that. So I think the healthcare environment faces the same concerns as the banking environment.
Yeah.
Having seen sort of across the banks and some of the different systems and governance in place, there is no standard solution. I think each bank is finding their own answers. There are tools out there that will help you anonymize your data and mask it in a way that preserves certain criteria around like k-anonymity and how easy it is to de-anonymize it. But yeah, to Tomi's point, like even when you think you've gone far enough, sometimes it turns out it's not. Like we can recreate, in some cases, find exact individuals, in other cases, find very specific groups. There are tools out there, and some of them have actually been built right here in Toronto, but it is certainly something that I think we need sort of the healthcare industry to put forward solutions and try to push them through the regulation so we can start sharing that data because it's a treasure trove and it's going to ultimately help our own population.
First of all, thank you very much. I just try to understand how you guys can work with the BI team, because I believe there are some interview between AI and PI, because AI predicting the future and PI processing the existing data. So how you guys are working with the PI team? This is first thing. Second thing, how about the future of the machine learning opportunities, and where do you see the future is going?
I can take the first part. In terms of BI and AI together, I think there's a lot of synergies there, right? Because I think there's a lot of not just from a reporting visualization perspective, but just trying to understand what it is, the impact that the model is making. I think the way that we structured a lot of use cases at Bell and now at HBC, it's a partnership between the two teams, right? That there's an AI component, but then there's a BI component that helps with kind of that understandability, is that a word? For the business units to actually then see what's happening. So we've always seen it as a partnership.
So I guess a good note to end on is where you see the use cases going. What are some new dimensions or new directions we can see machine learning go in the near term?
At National Bank, of course, there are normal use cases, fraud detection, risk, and so on. But a specific area would be personalization of services and product at scale, where we understand the specificity of a certain person, and AI and machine learning can do that at scale. So instead of trying to segment the universe and fit somebody in a big box, we're trying to customize what's relevant and useful for that specific person. Explainability is a big research trend. Whether or not we can answer that, governance. I don't know.
I'd say multimodal as well, right? Having interactions across different form factors really seamlessly work together. That's something I'm personally quite excited about. Yeah.
I'm excited about the community. So I've been coming to TMLS since the first year, and
awesome.
Just watching the community grow, Vector Institute attracting world-class researchers, the Toronto Waterloo tech ecosystem is absolutely on fire.
It is.
And so what I'm excited about is what this community will build, having access to this machine learning talent that's not available anywhere else.
Awesome. Well, please join me in giving our panelists a round of applause.